Good morning, everyone. My name is Shannon Hilsey, and I am a member of the Buildings Initiative with the World Resources Institute, and I'm really happy to welcome you all to this webinar today. Our topic is Considering Gender in Sustainable Building Projects, a discussion with the BEA partnership. And most of you, I think, are aware of the BEA partnership since we've centered the webinar around the experiences and questions that we have, but we're very happy to have many of you on the line who are not already members of our partnership. I'm going to give a quick overview of who we are and then describe what we're doing here today. So the Building Efficiency Accelerator is a public-private partnership that's part of the Energy Efficiency Accelerator platform of Sustainable Energy for All. It delivers technical expertise and best practices from thought leader organizations and companies from around the world to partner cities. Currently, the Building Efficiency Accelerator has 55 partner cities in 25 countries, as well as a number of cities that are working as deep engagements and engagements with national governments. The goal of all of these dozens of partner companies and organizations and cities working together is the same as the global goal on building sector decarbonization in order to meet our climate goals. So the goal is all buildings being zero carbon by 2050 and new buildings by 2030. So we have been working with cities since 2015 and are delighted to have this global network and to bring you some of the voices from our partnership and our network today to talk about gender in particular. Before we get into the run of show and a few technical notes, I just want to say a little bit about what we're doing here today. We have found as a partnership that it's difficult, frankly, I think all of you would agree with this on the line, it's difficult to figure out how to mainstream consideration both of gender inclusion and gender impact into our work. We find that the amount of research out there on the linkage between energy efficient buildings and low carbon buildings and gender equality is pretty low, that those linkages can feel tangential to make, and that when we're worried about kilowatt hours and tons of greenhouse gas emissions, it can be challenging to get cities both to focus on that goal and their own goals, as well as to be concerned about gender considerations. So long story short, this is something we feel like the global building sector has yet to really make progress on in the way that we need to, both from a perspective of jobs and inclusion of women in the buildings and construction industry around the world, as well as in considering the impact and the beneficiaries of our work. And something that we as a partnership that spans so many regions and has linkages with so many of the key players in this space can open up a conversation on that can be productive. So we're very happy to be opening that conversation with you here today. We look forward to hearing all of your thoughts during Q&A. So very quickly, after this, I'm going to hand off to Victoria Burrows, who will be giving us an opening. We'll have two presentations from Joëlle, Matt, and Christina Chiang, who we will give a brief bio of in a moment. And then WRI's Senior Gender Advisor, Natalie Elwell, will be leading us in discussion. We are so lucky to have some really fantastic experts on the line here to talk with us about their work and their experiences and research in this intersection of gender and buildings. I'm going to give a brief introduction, although I'll encourage each speaker to also introduce themselves at the beginning of their presentation. Victoria Burrows is Director of Advancing Net Zero, the pioneering World Clean Building Council project to ensure that all buildings are net zero carbon by 2050. Same goal as the Building Efficiency Accelerator. We're all working together here. With a strong background in the sustainable development industry, ranging from the client advisory services green building rating tool consultancy, and an on-site head of sustainability for a major international contractor. Victoria has experienced all perspectives of the sector and now works very closely with us, leading green building councils around the world toward net zero. Joëlle Matt acts as Econoler's lead expert on energy, gender equality, and social inclusion. She has 7 years of experience in the clean energy and climate change mitigation sectors and a multidisciplinary background combining social sciences, economics, international law, and human rights. And this enables her to consider many factors when analyzing energy and climate issues. She has vast international experience, having led work in sub-Saharan Africa, the Caribbean, Pacific, and Central Asia. Christina Chung is a Green Cities Specialist with the Global Green Growth Institute, supporting national and local governments in green building and green infrastructure planning. Prior to GGGI, Christina managed the UN Women's Safe Cities and Public Spaces program in Papua New Guinea and worked closely with women's groups in the informal economy. And Natalie Elwell, our moderator today, is Senior Gender Advisor at WRI, where she leads the Gender and Social Equity Initiative, which aims to improve the impact and sustainability of WRI programs, projects, and operations by enhancing our understanding of and capacity to address social disparities. A really fantastic panel of speakers that we have today, and I'm really excited to get started. So let's do that. I'm going to hand off to Victoria so she can begin her opening.
There we go. Excellent. Thank you very much. And just a huge thank you for inviting us today to be a part of this incredibly important conversation for considering gender and the role of gender in delivering on some of our goals and ambitions for sustainable building projects. As has been mentioned already, my name is Victoria Burrows, and I am the director of a project at the World Green Building Council called Advancing Net Zero. The World Green Building Council is a network of green building councils from around 70 national countries around the world, and we bring them together around key topics to advance the agenda for sustainable buildings, to achieve sustainable buildings for everyone, everywhere. And so Advancing Net Zero is a specific project with decarbonisation targets to ensure that the sector takes necessary climate action to keep us within a 1.5 degree scenario world. Our vision for total decarbonisation of the building and construction sector is that by 2050, new buildings, infrastructure, and renovations will have net zero embodied carbon, and all buildings, including existing buildings, must operate at net zero operational carbon. And we also have an interim date for 2030, so only 10 short years away, that new buildings, infrastructure and renovations will have at least 40% less embodied carbon with significant upfront carbon reduction, and all new buildings must be net zero operational carbon. What this represents is an enormous transformational shift in the way that our sector designs, builds, operates buildings and infrastructure projects, and the way that we are affecting nature, well-being, the use of the planet's resources, and the role of our sector to create healthy, thriving, and resilient communities and economies. We need to completely change the way that we have been addressing and approaching these design problems for basically up until now. And so that means that we need action from everyone, from all races, from all genders, religions, locations. Every country in the world needs to step up and change the way that buildings are designed and operated if we have any chance of meeting these climate action goals. We are fortunate to have incredible female leadership across more than 50% of the established GBCs in the World Green Building Council network. The CEOs are female, and that helps us in creating a common vision. They've helped us to secure that direction of travel for the future and to bring the strategic solutions necessary to meet that challenge. and nurture the change that is necessary and build up the skill set of the industry to deliver against this enormous challenge that we are facing. However, we are seeing less women represented in the disciplines that we are calling on to implement that change. We are seeing a bit more diversity in engineering, for example, than architecture, but currently nearly half of architecture students are women, which is fantastic, but that then only translates to 20% of licensed architects practicing in the field. Similarly, 13% of engineers are women, which is improving. We're getting certainly better at gender diversity within the sector, but only 30% of women who hold a bachelor's degree in engineering still work in engineering 20 years later. And women make up around 14% of the construction industry professionals. So we really have a problem with retention. We are increasing in numbers. It's improving, and that's really promising. But we really must create a space where women are the architects of their future and their career paths, and are not required to choose between their professional life and their family lives in order to realize their full potential. And that means addressing things like gender pay gap, to encourage these innovative thinkers to stay in the sector. Our theory of change to achieve this vision of decarbonisation is based on, as I mentioned, a sectoral shift towards radical new ways of engaging and implementing our building solutions. That means new collaboration models, really challenging the thinking that got us here in this position today, where we've inherited inefficient homes that are expensive to operate and contribute towards fuel poverty and so many social challenges and social issues. Increasing communication, as I mentioned, the storytelling, really sort of raising awareness and building that capacity of the promising stories that can happen and the solutions that are out there. Education around the technical solutions, the technicality required to achieve net zero buildings should not be underestimated. And so making sure that we, at every entry point into the sector, we're ensuring that people are educated on how to achieve these high performance buildings that we're looking for. And the innovative thinking, new business models, new technologies, circular patterns, really just challenging the way that we have been building and creating the built environment around us for such a long time now. And then finally, accelerating all of that action towards regulation, harnessing the power of our sector to deliver mainstream solutions through policy. And that means that we need to prove that it can be done in practice, and we need everyone to be getting behind this charge, this sort of call to action. And so therefore, this is a time for learning, not just for our industry, but society as a whole, about the choices we make and how they impact our future, and most specifically, how we interact with our buildings and our design projects. So I'm really keen to continue this conversation within the discussion, and I shall hand over to our next speaker, Joëlle. Bear with me just a second. Here we go, Joëlle, the floor is yours.
All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, hi everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here today and to participate in such an interesting discussion. Allow me to say a couple of words on Econoler first and foremost to explain you a bit who we are and our main activities. So Econoler is an international consulting firm with 40 years of experience in the design, implementation, evaluation, and financing of clean energy solutions, mainly energy efficiency and small-scale renewable energy. We are based in Canada, but are active at the international level in developing, emergent, and industrialized countries. For the past 5 years, Econoler has been working at the intersection of gender equality, social inclusion, and clean energy. And our ultimate goal is to mainstream gender across our whole project portfolio. I am leading this effort at Econoler on both the business development and project management side. So my work revolves around performing gender analysis of the clean energy sector, establishing gender-sensitive green financing mechanisms, supporting government in developing gender-responsive energy policies, and delivering gender awareness trainings. So my presentation today aims at exposing the gender gaps in energy access with a focus on the building sector. So I'm sorry because I'll be focusing on the problem mainly, but I believe that you can't fix a problem if you can't see a problem. So getting a good grasp, a good understanding of a problem is already part of the solution. So let's get started. This on the screen is the hypothesis. It's a gender-neutral hypothesis that has always been used to develop and implement energy initiatives. It goes pretty much like this. Everyone has energy needs, and those needs are the same for everyone. Those needs are fulfilled with means, which are planning and measures that are non-discriminatory. And this leads to a result that is a fair impact and an equal impact between men and women. This hypothesis is obviously wrong, and not only is it wrong, but it's wrong at every step of the equation. And the goal of my presentation today is to explain why does this hypothesis contribute to exacerbate inequality between genders regarding energy access. So let's break it down. First and foremost, the energy needs. So we all know SDG 7, by 2030, everyone should have access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy services. And indeed, energy is a universal need. Everyone needs energy for their own individual and community development. However, energy needs differ from person to person based on different factors, such as gender roles, socioeconomic status, occupation, and so on. And those energy needs will differ in all the different areas concerning energy needs, which are the household, at the workplace, and at the community level. So I'll skim over the household level because I think we've heard a lot about it and there has been plenty of studies. Basically, household chores are still not equally divided between household members, which leads to higher energy consumption by the person who's in charge of the household chores, which are usually women. At the work level, there's an interesting study, a recent study by Energia in developing country that found out that women-owned businesses are more prone to use fuel-based energy, while men-owned businesses are more prone to use electricity. And this would be explained by the fact that women in those countries are really more active in the agro-food sector. So already we see a different need here for a different type of energy. If I'm thinking about office buildings, I could think of some different energy needs that would arise from security considerations, because there's been plenty of studies that have shown the link between the level of lighting of a location and the prevalence of harassment and gender-based violence. So think about how a dark parking lot or a dark office entrance could impact women's sense of comfort and security, because women do have higher need for well-lit public places. Moving on to the community level. So due to their reproductive roles, which means that women are usually in charge of childbearing responsibilities, family care, and domestic work. Due to this role, women have a higher need for community facilities, such as health centers and schools and kindergarten. So an enhanced energy access in those type of buildings would likely have a higher positive impacts for women. So let's move to the measures. We saw how indeed energy needs are universal, but yet are differentiated based on gender. So let's see how what are the measures to fulfill these needs and how can they be discriminatory towards women. The first one is energy policy. So I've through the studies I've read and through the assessment I performed of energy policy framework, what we see is that energy policies are generally gender blind, which means that they fail to recognize that the roles and responsibilities of women and girls are ascribed to them and lead to different energy needs and constraints. And so if they fail to see those differentiated energy needs, they also fail to address them. That's how they are gender blind. I have yet to perform a gender assessment of a building code, and I think it would be a very enlightening experience to perform this assessment within the building sector. Moving on to the next measure, financing. So basically, women are largely left aside the financial mechanism that could enable them to purchase energy technologies or services. And they are left aside at the individual level as entrepreneurs. There's a major credit gap between women-owned and men-owned enterprises. And they are also left aside both in traditional and mobile finance because women are less likely to own a mobile phone than men. So I'm moving to the third one that I think is the most interesting example within the topic of buildings. So interestingly enough, technologies are also discriminate. They discriminate in the way that they are designed and the way that they are used. And so we did this assessment in 2019. We applied a gender perspective on air conditioners and minimum energy performance to see what would be the differentiated impact on women. And by the way, we didn't have the opportunity to collect any field data for this assessment, so it's mainly literature based, but it was still interesting findings. So the main finding that we found about air conditioner is the thermal discomfort. And I'm pretty sure this will be no surprise to most of the women sitting on this webinar. The question is, why are our offices freezing cold during all summer? And to answer that question, we need to look beyond the technology itself and pay attention to the standards that define what thermal comfort is. And there was this recent study published in the Nature Climate Change Journal that exposed how the ASHRAE standard uses the metabolic rate of an average male as a standard value in their thermal comfort model. And this leads to an indoor temperature that would be as much as 3 degrees too cold for women. And a too cold temperature not only creates, of course, a physical discomfort for women, but it also hampers their cognitive performance and decreases their productivity. And this is because other studies have shown that compared to men, women perform better at intellectual work in warmer temperatures. So for the record, ASHRAE scientists have rebutted this study and saying their model is based on a balanced sample of both men and women. And they say that the thermal discomfort is in fact due to clothing differences. So I can't tell you who's right or wrong this morning, but the fact remains that our offices are still too cold. And that leads to not only energy wastage, higher CO2 emission, but also to poor comfort and performance by most of their occupants. So we saw that the needs are differentiated and are fulfilled by means that can be discriminatory. So what are the results? Well, no surprise. There's a multidimensional inequality for women regarding energy, regarding access to clean energy in all roles. So as consumers, business owners, workers, citizens, and so on. So as a conclusion, I'd like to come back to this hypothesis we saw at the beginning, the gender-neutral hypothesis, and I'd like to suggest a new hypothesis to lead the development and establishment of clean energy initiatives. This hypothesis is gender responsive and goes like this. So we acknowledge that there are differentiated energy needs according to gender. We assess them at the micro level because needs can be differentiated based on geographic location as well and will differ from country to country. We address those differentiated needs with gender responsive planning and measures. And this would likely lead to an improved gender equality and to empowering women. And this would create a virtuous circle by which women being empowered would then mean a higher clean access to clean energy through fostering inclusive policies and programs. So, well, thank you for your attention, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any question or if you want to carry on the discussion. So let me hand it over to Christina.
Thank you, Joëlle. So good morning, everybody. I'm Christina Chung, and sorry, hang on, let me just play this one. And I work with the Global Green Growth Institute. So before working in development or with intergovernmental organizations, I worked for several years with an engineering consultancy, designing and delivering green buildings, and in the very early days of green buildings. So I'm very happy here to be talking with you about mainstreaming gender into green growth, focusing on how we can do that through delivery of green buildings. So hang on. Okay. So, well, both Joëlle and Victoria have already covered the discussions around gender gap. So I've included this slide mainly to demonstrate that despite many decades or hundreds of years of feminist movements, there exists still in our society or our economy today a considerable gender gap in many different sectors. So just to bring your attention to the lower left-hand blue circle, we find that climate change disproportionately affects women, and that in natural hazards or in disasters, women tend to lose their life more than men do. So this is due to numerous different reasons, of course. Hang on. Okay. So in GGGI, we recognize that gender equality is an essential outcome that needs to go hand in hand with the pursuit of environmental sustainability. Yeah, we recognize that women play a great role in climate change mitigation and adaptation activities, and we need to engage them as an equal partner. So back to the case of green buildings, and I think perhaps it has been discussed earlier, and all of you here are probably engaged with the sector in one way or the other and very familiar with the work on green buildings. And although there isn't a universal definition for green buildings, we typically approach trying to improve the performance of buildings in pretty similar ways across different countries and between urban and rural areas. We try to look for low embodied carbon materials or maybe more local materials. We try to look at prefabrication or reduction of waste. We try to look at energy efficiency. So the coming back to first principles, right? We try to look at green buildings as buildings that have lower environmental impacts than typical buildings in that context where we are assessing it. Right. We also, through introducing green buildings, we also want to enhance occupant comfort, as Joëlle was discussing. So we do we want to bring out an environmental benefit and also a social kind of benefit through green buildings. So in that case, isn't it obvious that green buildings are already good for everybody? Right? So I think the short answer to the question is yes, it is good for everybody, but it may not be equally good for men and for women. So it then becomes important for us to look at how we can make things as good for women as for men if they are not already so. Okay, And yeah, so as we have discussed earlier, there is really not a lot of information or a lot of materials out there that talks about how to discuss gender in green buildings or in the whole building sector. And we are often just carried away by the technicalities of our sector, and there are so many calculations, so many technical specifications to meet. Why do we make one more form of analysis to this already very complicated work? And the reason is because to ensure that we can optimize the benefits to women as we are doing for men. Okay, so in the transition towards green buildings, the difference, the social outcomes that we're looking at perhaps would be benefits such as creation of local jobs through energy efficiency retrofits, creation of local economies and local businesses through introduction of new materials and cultivating new construction methods, or through material reuse, we then give rise to new production methods or new industries in the area. So these come with accompanying training opportunities, job opportunities, and income generation opportunities as one benefit, right, of green buildings. So to ensure that these benefits reach both men and women, we need to consider, as Joëlle had very quickly discussed, the reproductive roles of women as different from men. Right? Women are very often involved in caregiving and also in ensuring that the house is running, ensuring the meals are cooked, that the house is clean. And also women engage a lot more in community work, in ensuring the surroundings are clean, the playgrounds are safe. So all these work take up their time. We also see women very often engaged in some form of income generation activity. And more often than men, women are in the informal economy. They work as market vendors, as waste pickers, or they cook meals for workers from home or take care of other people's children. And so very often women combine these responsibilities in the home, and they are engaged in multiple different activities at the same time. Okay. So in our assessment, we also need to understand the difference in the access to resources between men and women. If the household has ownership of a form of mobility, whether bicycle or a car, do women and the men in the household have equal access to the vehicle? Do women have equal access to information as men in the household? Can they read? Do they have access to the internet? Do they have Wi-Fi? And women, are they consulted equally on decision making, on financial management, and also to consider the time constraints of women from juggling all these multiple roles that they play at the same time. Okay, so when we consider the introduction of training opportunities and economic opportunities and job opportunities, we need to consider whether men and women access these opportunities equally. Okay, or whether we disadvantage women by having trainings in a specialized institute that requires considerable travels from the communities where they live. Yeah, the African Development Bank has developed a checklist for mainstreaming gender in the infrastructure sector. It's very general and it's very broad, but it's a really useful starting point to get the ideas moving, and then from there I think it's helpful to get started on designing how we would mainstream gender. So in GGGI we follow this standard method of gender mainstreaming in our projects. We start off with ensuring that there is meaningful participation of men and women in designing our interventions, and then we need to conduct a gender assessment to understand what men are responsible for and women are responsible for in the context where we are going to operate, and then also to project how our interventions are going to affect men and women. So based on that assessment, we articulate explicit gender outcomes of what we would like to achieve for men and for women that we work with in the project. So all throughout implementation, we should monitor and evaluate whether we are achieving these outcomes that we have planned for the project. And if we are not achieving the outcomes, then we need to make the necessary changes to come back to our initial goals. Okay, so I'm going to talk very quickly through 3 projects from GGGI. Last year, we were invited by the Ministry of Rural Development in India to introduce a green building framework for the National Housing Program for rural housing. And these are very low-cost housing. So through a consultative process with public and private stakeholders, and also with homeowner groups, we came up with this framework. And we also understood from the women home dwellers that having a safe kitchen and also a fixed and private space for sanitation, a toilet within their household compound, was very important to them. So although they have invested the financial support from government to construct these, there was very little awareness on how to use these appropriately. So we see that awareness of proper usage, particularly for kitchens and to choose the safe type of fuel for indoor cooking, was very important to ensure the health of women who are often in the kitchen. In Cambodia, GGGI has implemented a national green city strategic planning methodology, and this methodology ensures the participation of women in planning processes so as to achieve the social, environmental, and economic goals that the country has articulated in the NDCs and the SDGs. So this methodology was implemented in the capital city of Phnom Penh and endorsed by the National Council for Sustainable Development and is currently being replicated in 7 secondary cities in Cambodia. So finally, we also conducted a 3-part training program on gender mainstreaming in green growth in the city of Sonora in Mexico last year. So this training was conducted for public and private sector officials from the transportation and the electricity provision sectors. And at the end of the training, the participants developed a set of recommendations on how they see gender being mainstreamed in the 2 sectors in the transitions that they will make towards clean energy and towards sustainable transportation. And these recommendations were presented to the Chief of Staff in Sonora. So I know it was a little bit fast and a little bit too broad, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to address them later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our presenters. I think you're handing off to, here we go. So I'm Natalie Elwell. I lead our Gender and Social Equity Initiative at World Resources Institute, and I just want to give a big appreciation to all of our speakers. This is a challenging subject. As Shannon said at the beginning, we've been grappling with it for quite a while, and throughout my career, I've been grappling with it with many different professionals in the energy sector. And I think your insights are really helpful for us to start moving the conversation. And as was mentioned, this is not something that gets a lot of attention. While we may talk about it quite a bit in the gender community, asking how can we think about these issues, I think there's still a lot of unknown, and even there where we grapple, because it is such a technical sector. And so I want to ask you, from your perspectives and the organizations that you work with, what do you see as some of the obstacles as well as opportunities for overcoming some of these challenges and getting our colleagues to think this through and to really take up some of these recommendations on a broader scale? I put that out to whoever on the panel would like to answer that. Maybe we'll
Yeah,
start with
hi,
you.
Natalie. I can have a go. So I think I sort of alluded to it as part of the sort of discussion around retention and sort of the opportunities that this sector presents women all the way through their careers, you know, not just sort of the early stages. And so I think it's really important for us to ensure that we create that environment through addressing the gender pay gap, ensuring that there's appropriate educational opportunities and sort of growth opportunities within those spaces to support career development for women, to make sure that they are able to address these challenges and the direction that the sector's moving. You know, we're sort of aware of people that kind of leave their post and go on maternity leave to sort of start a family and come back, and there's, you know, whole new regulations to grapple with and sort of design tools and way that things are being approached. And so really kind of helping that process to sort of bring everyone along with this direction and the way that the sector needs to respond to the climate challenge, to so many other of the huge crises that are facing us at the moment. And so I think that can definitely go a long way to ensure that women don't need to make a choice of one or the other path.
Thank you. Joëlle or Christina?
Sure. So for me, I see one big challenges and many opportunities, which I think is quite optimistic. The main challenge is that energy is still a one discipline topic. Energy has always been and is still the prerogative of engineers and technical people. And while we obviously need this technical input, clean and modern energy is also a basic human right, and it has social and environmental ramifications. And energy, both at the supply and demand side, is at the center of the fight against climate change. So with a topic that is just so profoundly multifaceted, one of the big challenges is that we do not have a more interdisciplinary approach to energy. So that's the big challenge, I think. As for opportunities, I'm just very optimistic about the direction that the energy sector is taking. It's been incremental, but I feel that the sector underwent a major change over the past 5 years. And you now see requirements to consider gender equality in most energy projects that are financed by international organizations. And this would have been just completely impossible more than 5 years ago. So I definitely think we are in the right direction. I saw some amazing initiatives in some regions. I'm thinking of West Africa that has been so proactive in mainstreaming gender in their energy access policy framework. So I think our opportunities, and I'll go back to the topic of my presentation, is really we need to clearly identify gender differentiated energy needs. And once this is clear, it will just unfold naturally, that we will then find solutions, and then we will have results that are more gender equal. And we need to find solutions to enhance collaboration between actors from different fields. We can't expect the National Ministry of Energy to be able to mainstream gender in their policy and programs. It's not their job, and they do not have the background to achieve this. But we can go a long way with a collaboration between the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Women, for example, as long as both get the proper training.
Thank you. Christina?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think actually both Victoria and Joëlle have covered the responses really well. So I just wanted to add that, yeah, I think one of the obstacles really is this difficulty in working interdisciplinarily and introducing gender into a very technical subject is a big challenge, just because the professionals in the field who have traditionally been responsible for delivering the outputs are not trained to do these assessments and have not been required to integrate these considerations. So if we now say that you are required to consider these different issues in your design or in your plans, then we also need to provide some tools on how we can do that. Yeah, so So yeah, there aren't existing tools, then the professionals that are practicing in these fields are not trained to do so. So I think these difficulties also present an opportunity for a lot of organizations or a lot of personnel like us to fill the gap. And I think in particular, a lot of local grassroots organizations that have been working on either on safety of women in public spaces or on access to adequate housing, they have really documented the differentiated gender needs in regard to infrastructure or the built environment. And a first step would be really engaging these organizations, and then to build the capacity of women's groups and to build the capacity of the engineering and architectural professionals to engage with each other so that these concerns are properly integrated in the delivery of green buildings or in sustainable infrastructure, in clean energy, and this whole transition towards a greener built environment.
Great, thank you. One thing I'd like to open up to all of you and to our audience is this question of, so within the community, it's highly technical, and I think there's this concern that we're trying to go for low-hanging fruit with cities, just so that they'll take up some of the zero carbon recommendations, and it can be more challenging when you start thinking through how do we ensure that our investments in building efficiency are benefiting marginalized people, or how do we look at equity within the distribution of the benefits from these investments. So I wonder if we could think through, or if people have thoughts about that from our audience as well, what recommendations we might have for raising the ambition on how we can really think about equity within energy efficiency or building efficiency.
Sure, Natalie. So I think you're right about the low-hanging fruit. I think it's the right place to start as a sector. Addressing those sort of immediate benefits really help us build confidence in things like short-term returns. If you sort of spend maybe a little bit more money on something that's more efficient, it's going to save you in the long term, and people can see that if it's something that happens sort of immediately, if it affects their energy bills sort of instantly, if they make a switch for the type of light bulbs they're using or the type of energy they are, the sorts of energy provider they're using. But the sorts of improvements that we're talking about that we need to achieve as a sector need much deeper interventions. It needs to be thought about long term. We need to sort of be, yes, thinking about the things that can benefit us immediately, but how can we implement systemic change? How do different systems work together? How can buildings with different profiles that are within the same community be sharing energy, and how can energy efficiency measures from cities sort of grants and incentives, how can they benefit homeowners and business owners in terms of the amount of energy they consume and therefore the cost of operating those buildings. So we do need to be thinking about those immediate changes that can be made, but also the sort of longer term whole life carbon perspective, to make sure that we're actually not implementing sort of short-term solutions that need to be changed more frequently, which actually might not give us the best outcome in the long term. So that means creating demand. Women as the decision makers for things like energy provider within the homes, for example, creating that demand, knowing what your energy choices are, making sure that your local government is supporting those sorts of decisions, and what that means for consumer and consumption patterns for things like energy, water consumption, how much plastic we use, all those sort of decisions that are becoming embedded in day-to-day life that you can see right in front of you. When we're talking about something like energy, it's really difficult to sort of make that connection between turning on the light switch and, a coal-fired power plant somewhere a long way away, or an energy at a wind farm, for example. And so having that sort of very real-time view of how the decisions you're making are affecting these big challenges, then I think that can really help. And so in addition to that financial support, again, incentives for improving energy efficiency of homes and training programs that we're seeing all over the world to help sort of build this capacity, it really does need that demand. We need to be using our voices to say, you know, this is what we want from our homes, from our schools, from our offices.
Great, thank you. Any other panelists before I put it out?
Can I add to that as well? Yeah, I think one thing we need to accept, right, as a fact is that for equity in benefits, it's really to understand or accept that it is really difficult to help the poorest of the poor, and it takes effort and commitment. And very often, when we are introducing energy efficiency projects, we need quick results, we need quick profits, and so the obvious choice is then to go for low-hanging fruits. So to ensure that, you know, all these benefits that come from increased energy efficiency or increased performance from appliances can reach the poorest people, we need to really know that there is a political commitment to this, and that someone is going to pay for this and someone actually wants to see this happen, and then organizations will be able to put in the required infrastructure. So I think in our projects, very often we want to reach the poorest to ensure there is reduce gaps between the rich and the poor, and to ensure that the benefits trickle down. But the reality is that to reach the poorest communities requires a lot of incremental effort, a lot of incremental costs, as well as incremental risks of failure for the projects. So we need to explicitly acknowledge these difficulties, and then to address this in partnership with the local governments, with the local private sector, and then to work out a solution. But it only comes when everyone is committed to deliver these results. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to pause for just a minute to let anybody from the audience, if they have an intervention on that point or another, to unmute yourself and then speak up, because I can't see any hands on the panel on the side there. Are there any comments from the audience?
It looks like we have a hand from Ana Quiros from Green Building Council Costa Rica.
Great, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I find it's so interesting, this discussion, and the way it has been presented. I think that there's something that was mentioned at the onstart, and maybe it would be good also to have some information. You mentioned some statistics about the way this industry or this sector is conformed in terms of women in the at universities and in the field, etc. But I think that also even within our WGBC, we do not have information as to, for example, how are boards structured, and what is a good governance indication of how those boards for our different councils are conformed. We have in Costa Rica legislation that requires that we do have parity in our boards, and maybe some other countries have that. And is this happening with our own green building councils? Because one of the presentations did address how important it is that at the highest decision level, we do have not only the operational, but the decision level, we do have this vision from the different gender, the women and men, and sometimes that is not there. And that also looks at the other different sectors that we are addressing, which is not only the construction, but also at the public levels and the central government or federal government and local governments, and within the industry in the private sector. Because I think that we do need to make those changes, and it accelerates when we have the living experience from the women that are at those decision levels. So I think that's a challenge and also an opportunity to see how we can move forward in that direction too. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really important to think through. A number of other sectors have some set of, they're usually voluntary guidance, but that provide organizations, governments, businesses with some direction on that. And there are some global standards, but it'd be interesting to hear from the panelists if their companies follow anything like that, or if they have any set of guidance that they would recommend that people use or refer to.
Hi, Natalie. I mean, hi, Anna. Great to hear from you. And so fascinating that Costa Rica has that as legislation. I certainly hadn't heard of something similar. And I think we can certainly do a lot as the association that we are, the organization that we are, to sort of try and drive more of that within our community. So I'd love to work with you on how we can make improvements immediately, and maybe then we can use that process to help share some of that knowledge and that experience of going through that process to the members of the Green Building Councils as well, because that would be fascinating. I know we've had targets for gender parity on our board, and maybe others do, not just from a regulation perspective, but from organizationally, through their own CSR goals. So yeah, it'd be great to take that further with you. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to give the final word to Sumedha from WGBC's India office.
Hi, thanks, Natalie. Just two sort of comments and areas for further research and considerations because we are talking about opportunities. So I'm wondering whether we have been able to examine the role of green buildings at the point of construction in India and in many developing countries. There is a large informal construction sector, most of which is women oriented, and women are proportionally more exposed to construction related pollutants. So is there research and data looking at how greener buildings can mitigate pollutants better on construction sites? The second being the role of better design of social housing to reduce indoor air pollutants. In India, we have come across some recent case studies about how social housing in Mumbai has been transformed to allow for better ventilation. But the entry point being there was the higher incidence of tuberculosis, and how more efficient construction and slightly better design of openings and windows was able to minimize this sort of reduction in tuberculosis incidence in women. And the last point is really, rather a question back to the panelists, and probably you also, Natalie, is that how can we avoid this trap of making gender considerations a mere checkbox?
Yes,
Thanks.
Exactly. Sorry, I think, are we going till 10:30? I think I misunderstood the time. So we've got a bit more time for questions. Is that the case? Can I ask the organizers?
So technically we are out of time on the webinar.
Okay.
It won't end until we end it. So if we want 10 minutes for discussion, we have it.
Okay, great. Now I want to respect everyone's time here if we said until 10. So I think these are all incredible points. And this, for me, this has been very insightful. I think there's a lot of other entry points that we can be thinking about. I hope it's opened up some ideas for you to keep thinking through in your work, where you could start nudging some of these issues. And I agree with some of our panelists. There's a whole range of things, from starting with education and training engineers and people who work in these fields early on about how to look at equity, how to look at gender issues, how to think through long term what we need to be doing and the impact of some of these investments, because they are long-term investments. And through to the project cycle, right? And thinking about how at every stage we might build that in. There was a comment in the chat about mainstreaming. And so thinking through just all the different points where we might bring this in. And it sounds to me like there's probably some interest in a community of practice. So hopefully through the BEA, we can continue this conversation. So I'm grateful to our presenters, as well as to my colleagues who organized this event for raising this concern and these questions and opening up the opportunity for all of us to start discussing this. So thank you all for joining as well. And I look forward to an ongoing conversation about this. Natalie or Shannon, if you have any final remarks.
Thanks, Natalie. No final remarks. Just want to thank everyone so much for joining us today. And yes, note that we do intend to carry this conversation forward, both internally to the BEA and in our partnerships with other buildings and construction alliances around the world. So we look forward to seeing you all there to continue these important points. And thanks so much again to our speakers and to you, Natalie, for moderating. All right, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.